Aaron is present. Thanks for joining me, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I was honored last week to be able to interview Dr. Steve Hassan. Dr. Hassan is the author of a book that I mention frequently on my channel called Combating Cult Mind Control. Reading this book was an important step for me on my path out of Scientology, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And it's one of the reasons I mention it so frequently on my channel. I also appeared as a guest on Dr. Hassan's podcast called The Influence Continuum. We recorded that just yesterday. It should be out soon. Dr. Hassan's website is called freedomofmind.com. The website has links to many other books, articles, studies, and resources that Dr. Hassan has written and uses to help people leave cults and high control groups. Without any further ado, here is my chat with Dr. Steve Hassan. Okay, good. We're live. Dr. Steve Hassan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Aaron. And Aaron, I'm a fan of your good work in the Aftermath Foundation, as you know, and Leah and Mike. And one of my best pals in the world is John Atack, who I've known since '89. And I was like, you're really cool. You're standing up to Scientology. And he said, you're really cool. You're standing up to the Moonies. And we've been off to the races ever since. We just really enjoy each other a lot.
I'll tell you, I love talking about your book, Combating Cult Mind Control. I mention it in my videos all the time, particularly my live streams, my interviews, and my chats that I do with people.
Thank you.
And it really is one of the things that was a huge eye-opener for me on my way out of Scientology. And before I forget, I want everyone to check out your website, freedomofmind.com. And from that website, you can find Dr. Hassan's YouTube channel, podcast, course, his PhD dissertation. And the name of your podcast is The Influence Continuum. So that's just for everyone to check out.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Aaron. And you're going to come on the Influence Continuum. This was a reciprocal deal, right?
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, just back to your book again, you know, I do work with the Aftermath Foundation. We help people who are escaping from Scientology. And then there's two books that I recommend everyone leaving Scientology read. And one of them is Combating Cult Mind Control. And, you know, I was asked a question recently as I learn a bit more about other high control groups and cults. Like, I was asked a question having to do with like, which one is most similar to Scientology? And I was like, no, it's not like that at all. They're all exactly the same. All of these organizations are the same. Your story about the Moonies, to me, was devastating, because what I took away from it was that Scientology is not even a special brand of bullshit. It's garden variety bullshit. And anyway, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on these different groups, what they have in common versus what they have unique to them?
So I guess the first thing I want to say, Aaron, is just that the way I think about cults is along the influence continuum from ethical to unethical. So, excuse me. So ethical cults, you know, you're big fans of a rock man and you travel over the country, going to concerts. Or I was actually in a book called The Cult of Mac, believe it or not, because the guy interviewed me and I said, I've only been using Apple since 1980s. And so I'm in the book, The Cult of Mac, but all the way to authoritarian, destructive cults, which program in a new identity that's a version of that particular cult, and using my BITE model, behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. And that's in fact what I did my doctoral dissertation on. So having said that, there's so many different types of undue influence, destructive cults, from multi-level marketing groups, religious groups, political groups, therapy groups, large group awareness training groups. I actually know a lot about Scientology. I was one of my first friends getting out of the Moonies was an ex-Scientologist. So for me, there's a special bond, if I can use that term, because it was like so obvious that Hubbard, the science fiction writer, was not the Messiah. I mean, my guy had been the Messiah. Is so weird, right? And I'd befriended Paulette Cooper. As soon as I went public, it was like, oh, thank God, someone else is has the balls to stand up against these very wealthy cults. So a lot about Scientology. I just finished a chapter for a textbook for the International Society of Hypnosis, and with John Atak's help, he wrote an article called "Never Believe a Hypnotist," all about Hubbard studying hypnosis. So I actually used Hubbard as the main cult template for describing, Ranieri and NXIVM and Yogi Bhajan and NLP, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Scientology is up there in the top 10 destructive religious cults or pseudo-religious cults I've ever worked with. And, of course, they harassed the crap out of me. They picketed my office in Nazi uniforms, went through my garbage cans, blah, blah, blah. Tried to get my license revoked endless times, etc. Just a lot of fair gaming. But what I do want to say, that you are absolutely correct. There is this behavioral playbook that all cults use, no matter they're religious or therapy or whatever. Typically, the leader is a malignant narcissist. So not just narcissism, but also thinking they're above the law, pathological lying, sadistic, paranoid, unable to trust. There's a long list, and that's on my freedomofmind.com website too. But then this playbook of controlling behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, that you can plug it into People's Temple and Jim Jones, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. You can go down the whole list. And, I'm going to just take a moment and just hold up one of my other images. Most people in cults are what I call fringe members or outside members. And then as you get in and you become a member, rank and file, like to use Scientology, we got the Sea Org up here, right?
So I can see rank and file, core devotees. I cannot read the
fringe members. So people
no,
who...
I can't read the orange, the one down from the red.
Sorry, sub leaders is what's
Sub-leaders,
the tiny
okay.
little thing. Forgive me. That's on my website too, that image. But the idea is a lot of people have exposure on a superficial level, and they go, it's not so bad. I went to a workshop, or I took the calm course, and it's fine. And they have no clue that what I'm criticizing is the main body of abuse and violation of human rights.
Right. Okay, so on your influence continuum, am I understanding correctly that it's not that at one end of the spectrum is not a cult and the other end of the spectrum is a cult? You're saying something could be a cult on either end of this spectrum. You could have a non-destructive, non-authoritarian cult.
1000%. I'm in the scuba divers cult. Like, I love scuba diving. I feel so awe and just amazing when I'm underwater, just floating with fish and looking at reefs and stuff. And I meet anybody in the world and they say they like diving. We are instant friends, and we start sharing our favorite dive sites and what equipment we want to use and blah, blah, blah. But it's expensive, and you can lose your life if you don't know what you're doing. But I feel like it's a cult. Like we have our own words, but we're free to do it. We're free to leave it. We can read criticisms. We can, you know what I mean? We have our conscience. We have our critical faculties. Unlike when you're in a really bad authoritarian cult, they say, don't believe anything an ex-member says.
Well, so then let me ask you this. Let's stick with the scuba diving. Then why is it fair to call it a cult at all?
Because culture, the word cult is part of the word culture. And it really, if you can go through the dictionary definitions, there are different definitions, but it's about being like passionately, intensely involved with a group of like-minded people. So there are some people are really into tulips, some people who are really into bicycling long distances or running marathons, and a big chunk of their life is involved with this thing. Some people have interviewed me about CrossFit, for example, and it's not a destructive cult, but people can overdo it and hurt themselves if they're not being careful and listening to their body, etc. But, life's risky, just like when scuba diving, some people die.
So many arguments and debates and conversations hinge so critically on how you define words. And so I guess what we're talking about here is you're saying cult, the way you define it and on your influence continuum, is not inherently a negative word. It's the authoritarian, destructive cults that are negative. But the word cult itself, you do not use pejoratively.
Right. But, the public will often, use it in a pejorative way. But think about it. You'll see Rocky Horror Picture Show, the cult film, Rocky Horror Picture Show. People see it 20 times and they dress up as the characters. It's a cult, but they have fun and they enjoy it. And so that's how I really think it's more valuable than to only think it's negative, to think about other groups and situations that are pretty intense.
Sure. So you mentioned that you'd probably put Scientology in your top 10 of destructive authoritarian cults.
Yeah, religious cults. I would put China up there as one of the big political cults, for example, or Putin, and just dictatorships with malignant narcissists as heads.
So let's stick with religious cults then.
Sure.
What would you say is the most destructive religious cult that you've come across?
By what criteria? So
whatever,
we can talk
criteria.
about Jehovah's Witnesses that have been around since the 1800s, and they won't let you have a blood transfusion. So how many people have died for no reason because they've had a blood transfusion? Or the 35,000 person list of pedophiles where they never reported the people to authorities because of their ridiculous criteria of saying you need 2 people to witness the sex abuse of a minor or anybody in order for it to be real. It's like, huh? So JWs are very, in terms of magnitude, they have 8 million odd people. The Mormons are very high up there, but I think less badly about them than I do the JWs. I honestly, I need to think more about it, but there are religious cults happening right now where somebody says, I am an apostle of God. I get direct revelations from God. God says, do this or this or this. Go take a stick and beat your child because obviously your child has a demon because your child wants to leave our church. I actually wrote a letter for a judge because a father killed his son because he had a prophet, leader of his cult telling him that his son was possessed. And if you love your son, keep beating him. And he killed this kid and now he's in jail.
Wow. So, okay, it sounds like it's not fair to think or to think that you have it like actually ranked, but and I don't know what the value of such a ranking system would be anyway. But like if you had to take, let's say, your top 3, is JW right there in the top 3?
I think so.
And
I think my cult goes the highest because
the Moonies?
I'm biased.
Moonies or scuba divers?
No, Moonies. Sorry.
I'm kidding.
You caught me. No, for your listeners, I was recruited at age 19 at Queens College by women flirting with me after my girlfriend dumped me. And I got deceptively recruited into this cult where the Korean Messiah was going to save the world. and I was promoted into leadership so that I could hear what the plans were. And Moon literally said, we're going to take power in America. We were going to amend the Constitution. We'll make it a capital offense if people didn't want to follow, our instructions, because we would be sending them to the spirit world. Well, will we save them later? And this is right now. Moon died. His wife has one branch, big branch, and then two sons. One of them has a gun cult called the Rod of Iron Ministry, saying you need an assault rifle to worship God properly. And the other brother has a gun factory making AR-15s. Isn't that convenient? And they have two training camps where they're training using former vets how to do violent civil war in America right now. So the Moonies,
this is in America. This is not.
This is right now. They were at January 6th. This is happening right now. So in my subjective biased way, I would put Moonies 1, Scientology 2, maybe. Excuse me, and JW's 3, maybe.
So the two people you just referenced, the two sons that are running up these cults, these are direct descendants of Moon, the head of the Moonies.
Sons, and
his sons.
One says, "I am the king. Father in the spirit world is working through me." And in the meantime, Moon's wife, Hak Jahan, has the bulk of the money and is doing the bulk of the political crap.
What's the name of the sons?
Sean Moon has the Rod of Iron Ministry.org. And Justin Moon has the Car Arms, KEHR Arms, and a whole factory making guns in Pennsylvania.
Wow. Are they low key or subtle about their connection to the Moonies?
Are they low key? Not at all.
Do they hide it, or is it totally open?
Oh, it's totally open. They hate their mother, and they try to steal billions of dollars. They went to court. At first they won, and I think it was reversed. But the assassination that took place in Japan of the former premier, Abe,
yeah,
that was done by a young man whose mother joined the Moonies when he was little. And the mother gave all the money to the cult, the Moonies. And what is being reported in the media is that he tried to kill Hak Jahan first, couldn't get access to her, and then decided to kill Abe. But that's created a whole revolution in Japan right now, where they're looking at all the politicians that have relations with the Moonies. And I'm going to take one more minute to tell you another thing that most people don't know. But the Moonies in Japan were the largest consumer fraud investigation in their history. Get this, Aaron. They would read the obituaries, track down someone who just lost their wife or their husband or their child, knock on their door and say, "Your deceased husband talked to me from the spirit world, and he's in a very low level. And he told me to come and knock on your door because we can do a liberation ceremony to help him elevate in the spirit world. So we need you to go to your bank and get the equivalent of whatever, $50,000. And so they did this to 35,000 that we know of people, and got something like $800 million. In Japan, it was called spiritual sales. So why I'm telling you this is the Japanese people don't like the Moonies. Like, they really don't like the Moonies. And when this second generation, or wherever, young man who grew up killed Abe and said, I did it because he and his father and grandfather helped establish the Moon cult in Japan, the Japanese people were like, the Moonies are evil. We need to do something about them.
Did you, the Prime Minister of Japan, Abe, what's his name?
Yeah.
He had a role in establishing the Moonies in Japan?
His grandfather and father, and then him, were endorsing the Moonies, protecting the Moonies.
Wow.
Keeping them with religious status.
Oh, wow. It really was a religiously inspired assassination. I had no idea.
Yes, it really was. And I, because I know a lot of your listeners are ex-Scientologists, I will add that when I first got deprogrammed in 76 and started thinking again, going, how did I ever believe all this? I brought out a lot of internal documents about Moon's plan to take over the US government, etc. And I naively thought they would shut down the cult in the United States. Why did this investigation take place? Because two people high up in the Japanese government, the embassy, said, our country has a covert plans for influencing your country. So this congressional subcommittee happened, right? And what we found out is the CIA set up the Korean CIA. And because South Korea had two coups and it was unstable, they were thinking, oh, we'll help them brainwash South Korean dissidents because we know North Korea brainwashes people to be obedient. We'll pick a proxy group to be the front for brainwashing South Korean dissidents. It was the Moonies.
Wow.
And it was only when Americans said, we got to get out of Vietnam, we shouldn't do this violent thing in other countries, then they brought the Moonies to the US. And that's the
Wow.
point that I was recruited. So there's a whole, because I know the Scientologists don't like the CIA. They, very much talked about MK Ultra and mind control research, which is absolutely true. The CIA really did this stuff. And yours truly believes that I was a 2.0 or a 3.0, where I was ready to die on command or kill on command. But I had no idea who the puppet masters were. I actually believe God was directing Sun Myung Moon.
So are you saying that the CIA was the puppet masters behind the Moonies in the US?
Pretty much so, yeah. George Bush Sr. was head of the CIA during the congressional subcommittee investigation. And the staff director who was in charge of it told me in person that he did everything he could to sabotage the investigation and not give any information. And then after he became president, not only did he say the Washington Times was his favorite newspaper, which is the Mooney newspaper, but he got $2 million for speaking for the Moonies, which we think was a bit of a payoff.
The Washington Times is run by the Moonies?
Is
owned by the Moonies?
Yeah. Since its beginning.
I did not know that. I mean, that's probably in your book. I did not remember that.
I put a bunch in combating about it. All I can say is state actors are very interested in mind control. They're very interested. How can we predict and control human behavior? And, this is an ongoing, escalating psychological warfare situation that we're living in 2022. And my only answer is educate everybody what mind control is and how to protect yourself and how to check sources for information and how to think critically about things. Look for evidence.
Help me understand this point, because then it might relate in a more greater way to other cults. What is it like if the CIA is using the Moonies as somewhat of a tool? What is it that the Moonies are accomplishing with its members or whatever that the CIA sees as beneficial to its interests?
Oh, I don't know that I am able to answer that in any great detail, especially now. But for example, during Watergate, we were sent to fast for Nixon on the Capitol steps because God wanted Nixon to be president. And I'm sure the CIA and the Korean CIA never imagined that Nixon would resign, like ever. So it was one act. Another political act I was involved with was a 7-day fast in front of the United Nations building when they were voting on whether or not to remove troops from South Korea for human rights violation. State actors have used cults for front groups forever. So Lyndon LaRouche, conspiracy theorist, anti-Semite, etc., pals with Roger Stone and Russia. MEK, pals of the CIA to fight the Iranians. We should probably move off of political stuff and go back to religious cults. But the point is the CIA intelligence organizations, I'm saying the CIA a lot, but there's probably about 25 intelligence organizations in the US, many of which we don't know, and probably a few that have no congressional oversight, even though that's where the money's coming from. So MEK was this, they had the first female suicide bomber. They were against Khomeini when he took over, and they were in Iraq doing terrorist acts in Iran. The CIA was like, "Yay, do more of that," and then it flipped. But the Rand Corporation did a whole report on MEK as a brainwashing mind control cult.
Interesting.
But the media doesn't want to report about cults. They really are scared, or they've been advised not to go there.
It is interesting, right? But they do report on Scientology.
Now.
Yeah, now.
For many decades, I'd be asked to do, we're going to do a story on cults. Got some good ones. I'm like, Scientology. Nope, can't do that one. Seriously, over and over and over again. But I think we finally tipped where big people came out. Mike Rinder, Leah Remini really did incredible thing to just say, heck with their harassment. This is wrong. I'm going to out them. My friends are still in there. And that really, now we're in a different period of time, for the way I see it, because I've been out for 46 years, where more and more people are telling their cult stories, like documentaries, podcasts. So even Sarah Edmondson, who is a former NXIVM, the one who had a branding and went public with it, calls it the golden age of cults, where people are outing them left and right.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, between the Scientology content and the NXIVM content, it certainly feels like the golden age. Have you been in touch with Sarah Edmondson and Mark Vincente?
Oh, yeah. They're friends of mine, and they've been on my podcast, and I've been on theirs. I think I was their first guest, actually, for their podcast. Courageous, wonderful people, and they're, doing great work with their podcast. I really love, I like listening to other people's podcasts because I learn about other groups. And they had a woman on who was in the inner circle of the Rajneesh cult, the red, the 92 Rolls Royces in Oregon. And this woman was sterilized at age 25 because Rajneesh said you get a hole in your spirit if you have a child. And he just, was a sex addict like so many other cult leaders. So I didn't know she existed, but she was public, and wow, that's really cool. And of course I could say, hey, Sarah, could you introduce me to Aaron? And they'll like email, boom, and vice versa. I'm happy to introduce people that I find that I think are fascinating. But I want to just say I decided to call it the influence continuum because I didn't want to just talk about unethical influence. I want to talk about the good stuff, like things that can help us parent, things that can help us protect ourselves about the internet, and other, having gratefulness. I did an incredible interview with Christine Nelson on her book. And for me, that book would be attractive for anybody to read without feeling like, oh, there's a religious element or something. It's just like how much your life will improve if you put your attention on what you're grateful for versus putting your attention on how you're ill or how you don't have enough money or how you this or that. Just to remember, hey, I have two hands. I can walk, I have two eyes. I'm living in a relatively free country. And I just was on somebody's YouTube live yesterday who wrote a book called Unveiled, Aaron, about growing up a Muslim fundamentalist and how abused women are in that. And she was married off to a guy who turned out to be in Al Qaeda.
Where did she grow up? Like what region?
Canada, but
Canada.
in this family that, hung her upside down and hit her on her bottoms of her feet, and made her wear, cover herself everywhere, and who said it, making friends with outsiders was evil.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
When you think about the answer to the question I asked of like, well, what's the top 3 destructive religious cults? Would you define how destructive a cult is in terms of like numbers of actual lives lost? For example, you mentioned the example about blood transfusions and actual lives lost. Or do you think it more in terms of how insidious it is? Like, could a cult be very small but still rise to the top of your list, the way that you define it?
Yeah. So the thing is I don't have a scientific method yet to actually score how bad a group is, but I'm hoping we will get there with the use of open source information and AI. But so for example, I interviewed Daniela Masnick Young, who was raised in the Children of God cult, which was a sex cult run by a pervert pedophile prophet of God. And that's very high on my list of destructive cults. Whenever their children are being abused, it gets me extra credit points for destructive authoritarianism. But I yet to have a scientific way to codify that. But certainly as a therapist who works with victims on an individual level, some people just were raised in an authoritarian family with narcissistic father or mother and were brutalized.
Right. So I'm curious, what aspects of Scientology cause it to rise pretty high on your list of destructive religious cults?
Good question. Well, let's start with the training routines. So and I think it was Robert Vaughn Young, who first demoed the training routines for me with Stacy Young and Jesse Prince. You have to put your hands on your lap, your feet flat on the floor, close your eyes, and just be there. I'm like, excuse me, that's hypnosis. No, it's not. I'm like, yes, it is. I've been studying hypnosis for decades. That's hypnosis. And then the staring in the eyes of a Scientologist, that's next step of hypnosis. Then the bull baiting is the next level of training dissociative states where people can say, there's a snake on your shoulder. And you're like, I realize I'm looking at you on my screen instead of here.
That's okay.
But then they train obedience for people to do, just be blindly obedient. And they do it over and over and over. That's just a taste. But why we wrote about Hubbard in this chapter on the textbook was because Hubbard in the early days wrote about hypnosis, even mentioned specific books, etc. But honestly, people are really indoctrinated in Scientology. I mean, they are really thought-stopping. You can't ever criticize Hubbard or the tech or the policies, and you get this thing. Yeah. Of course, Scientology had the ship and the overboarding and the hull and fair gaming and the Sea Org and the trafficking and, just lobbying governments to get tax exemption status, breaking and entering government offices, and stupidly having all the paperwork to document it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to talk with you and have you ask this question, because I typically get a set of regular questions and these aren't those. So I'm happy that you're making me think. And how
well, and I haven't even prepared for the interview because I just wanted to have like a natural, organic chat, as if we were just hanging out.
we are hanging out, and I really love to be challenged and to think about things, but I'm pretty down on the Chinese dictatorship, even though we've just recently had protests around the COVID mandates where the government actually changed their policy. That is astounding to me. That, in a good way, that dissidents and saying, no, we're not going to do what the government said. Wow, great news. But they have re-education programs where they have over 1 million, up to 2 million Uyghur Muslims that they're programming to become Chinese, Han Chinese in their mindset, and destroying their culture and their religious beliefs. I think that's horrible.
Yeah. I've read very little about that, I guess. I'll tell you, I visited China a couple times in the last couple years, and and one of my closest friends lives in Shanghai now. He used to live in Beijing, and I stopped short of expressing any strong opinions on this subject because I've just come to the conclusion that almost any information we're given by almost any source in any country is propaganda to one degree or another, and it's almost impossible to know what to believe. Which seems like maybe a precarious state of mind to have, but it's like, I think there's something to be said for just realizing that almost anything you read or hear is coming with some sort of an agenda. And so I guess this is a long response to, I've read some about that, not much. And, we have such an anti-Chinese propaganda in our media. I'm just going to say that. Well,
I'm very protective of Chinese Americans who are being persecuted because of what is happening over there. But China has been, ripping off our technology, and they want to take over the world. And they are used to having a long game. And in America, we keep voting in politicians every few years, and nobody's thinking the long game of how are we going to be around in another 200 years, which is a big problem. But I do want to come back to what you just verbalized, because it's so important. I want to hear a diversity of opinions from many different sources, and I want to evaluate who is the source, what is their background, and do they have a hidden bias, or do they cop to their biases? Like I cop to my biases. People say, Steve, you're biased because you were in a cult. And I'm like, yep, guilty. I can't help but when people are being abused, starting to think, how are they being abused, and go through the list of techniques, right? I don't think it's I mean, and I should say I went to mainland China in the 90s. I went to Hong Kong to teach also in the 90s. When I was in mainland China, we had a minder along with the tour guide, and he was ragging on the Dalai Lama. And so being the Westerner, I said, I don't know, I think the Dalai Lama is pretty cool. And then we're walking around, they're showing us the zoo, and he takes me aside and says, is the Dalai Lama like okay? And because the Chinese put up their own Dalai Lama because they want to get rid of Tibet and claim it as China, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, and one more thing, when I was in China, that blew my mind. There were a lot of people on the streets, and I said, I'm noticing you have two horns on the bus, a loud horn and a louder horn. And we're driving along and there are all these people in the road. And I'm noticing you hit the loud horn and then you hit the louder horn. And if they're not out of your way, you hit them. He said, yeah, of course. And I'm like, in America, you can't do things like that. And they're like, really? Why not? We'd never get anywhere if people didn't know to get out of the way, and it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
But that was my firsthand experience. I mean, I really admire the history of China. I think they got a bad deal with the Opium Wars in Britain, and there's a lot of stuff. But I'm for human rights. If you're going to say,
Totally.
Steve, what are you into? The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think everyone should be respected, whether they're male, female, gay, indigenous, minority religions, whatever. Give a basic human respect for everybody, and let's figure out how we can live together on planet Earth and survive.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, and also I don't want to be one of those guys who's like, I've been to China twice, so I'm an authority on it. Like that's intellectually dishonest as well. But I'll tell you, here's what I mean when I reference the anti-Chinese propaganda. Even when I told people I was going to be going to China, like, oh my God, is it safe? Are you going to be okay? And everything I had heard about China in our media my entire life led me to believe that the Chinese people are, to some respects, just anti-American. Like they think about us in a negative fashion. And yet you go there, they could not love America more.
We helped them enter the 21st century.
Yeah.
A lot of people were just farmers and totally uneducated. There's a huge middle class. And frankly, when I was there in the 90s, it was just really beginning to open up, way before they started building all the factories and bringing all this wealth and technology there. I protect Chinese Americans who are getting discriminated against. I did an interview with a Chinese American Department of Labor official on my website and podcast, Paul Chang, who loves my model and uses it to describe labor trafficking. But he's at the forefront of trying to stop discrimination against anybody.
Yeah. But like, wouldn't you agree? I think your average American who's never, let's just say, left the country, much less gone to China, would probably be shocked to find out that the Chinese people love Americans. The NBA to the Chinese is practically like a religion. They love the NBA more than we love the NBA. Kobe is like, I mean, Kobe's more famous over there than Tom Cruise. I mean, he's not with us anymore, but you know what I mean?
So what I came to realize when I was physically in China was that my opinion about not wanting to help them get technology and interact with us was ill-advised, and that in fact, if we wanted to promote human rights, the best thing was more contact and let them send students to our universities to get trained. And yes, is it possible that they're now having to report back everything and their phones are being monitored? It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
But I try to keep coming back to not having black and white, all or nothing evaluations about anything, and being open to other points of view and evidence in particular that's persuasive.
Right.
So I just think it's healthier to have an open mind than to think you know everything and be certain about it.
Yeah. Well, your website's called freedomofmind.com. So that makes sense.
So I say to all my clients, Aaron, it's your mind. You should control it. Don't let anyone else control it. You should have an internal locus of control for what you think and feel, and you should be able to change your mind and not feel pressured externally that your thoughts are wrong or that you need to adopt a particular ideology in order to progress spiritually up the bridge to total freedom. Sorry about that. But what can I say? I think we are enhanced by exposing ourselves to many different points of view. The problem is a lot of people think that just teaching critical thinking is what's missing, but it's really a lot is about media literacy and checking your sources, and especially on the internet, like, who said that? And that doesn't make sense. And is it verified? And what is the evidence? And there used to be much stricter journalistic standards, and the healthy journalistic standards, if people got something wrong, they apologized and corrected it publicly, and not just on the 15th page or on a website after it's been blasted to millions of people. But to say, I really got that wrong, sorry about that, and here's what we now know about things.
Yeah. You mentioned a moment ago the UN Declaration of Human Rights. What are your thoughts on the fact that Scientology has adopted that as one of their pet causes to cloak themselves in legitimacy? That, it's one of the things they'll spend some token amount of dollars on to go around and educate kids on the UN Declaration of Human Rights. That's how Scientology tries to puff itself up as we are a force for human rights.
It's a PR thing. So, but I tell my clients who have kids in Scientology to use that and actually discuss all of the points, because if you get into the points, then it becomes more obvious that the organization doesn't respect human rights. Doesn't allow you to talk to whoever you want to talk to, assemble.
Right.
We have to disconnect from Aaron. He's evil.
Right.
Or Mike Rinder or John Atack or whatever. Yeah. The UN Declaration of Human Rights doesn't think that's okay.
Right. It's very ironic that Scientology.
It's not ironic. They were clever. They were trying.
Okay, true.
It's like cults saying, we're going to now teach you about cults. And members are like, well, see, we can't be a cult because they're teaching us about cults.
That's true. It is intentional. It is intentional.
It's really intentional. And let them live out their ideals. Scientology says you can talk to anyone about anything, anytime. Okay, let's talk about fair game.
Right. Well, I mean, Steve, it gets even crazier. Like asking a Scientologist to look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights and analyze whether Scientology lives up to that. I mean, hell, L. Ron Hubbard's own code of honor, Scientology doesn't even adhere to, and yet Scientologists don't have the freedom of thought to even connect those dots.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I just want to comment that for me, one of the universals of mind control is phobia indoctrination, which in a person, they can't imagine leaving and being happy and fulfilled. Like they're in a box, but they don't know it until they meet an ex-member who's happy and fulfilled. And then, so what do they do with that dissonance between their authentic self that wants to be free and wants to read whatever they want to read and maybe talk to their family members, even though the organization said that you can't, right? So it's about interaction. And I actually did a TEDx, Aaron, how can I know if I've been brainwashed intentionally? Because instead of saying you're in a cult, what I do in the TEDx is I tell my Moonies story and I tell what worked in my deprogramming, and I outline a reality testing strategy. And I say, basically, take a time out from the group or whatever, like turn off the constant re-indoctrination stuff, go walk in the woods, turn off your phone. Study models of authoritarian mind control, which is Lift and Singer, my bite model of mind control. Then deliberately seek out critics and former members. Why? Because if you're an intelligent adult and you believe that you are free thinking and nobody's controlling your mind, you trust your ability to talk to anybody and assess whether what they're saying has evidence or makes sense or not. So deliberately seek out the most knowledgeable people. And now I'm going to do a plug for John Atak, and let's sell them a piece of blue sky. Because in my mind, there's no one who knows more about Scientology than my friend John. Read the book, talk to John, talk to Aaron, talk to Mike Rinder. Why not? Then take the models of mind control, take what the critics said, go back in your mind to before you were recruited and say, if I knew this before I joined, would I have ever gone to that first session?
Mm.
Or think over key moments in your membership where you were questioning and wanted to leave. If you know this information, then would you want to stay or would you want to leave? And if the answer is I would never have joined in the first place or I would leave, then it's time to leave now. That's my formula.
You know, I'm embarrassed to say I have not yet read Piece of Blue Sky, even though I've had it in my office for years now, because I don't think it's on audiobook. I'm waiting for an audiobook. I don't have the attention span anymore.
I hear you loud and clear, and all I can say is talk to John.
Yeah.
I made him read his latest book, Opening Minds, which I highly plug as a general protective educational device. But have someone read it to you or get Speechify and have it, read to you. I'm telling you,
sure? Does he not have an audio
book?
But is it not on Audible? Do you know for sure it's not?
I don't think it is. I think you're correct that it is an audio, but he recorded Opening Minds. So I bet if you and I and a bunch of other people say, John, we'd buy your audio version, please record it, and he might consider reading it.
If his concern is how long it takes, I'm going to propose that he enlist Mark Bunker to do the audiobook.
John is one of the smartest people I've ever met on the planet. And for your listeners who don't know, he's also a novelist, a painter, a drummer, interpreter of Lao Tzu. I mean, the guy is so smart, and he has the kind of mind where he remembers like the most obscure, Hubbard said this in 1953 in this technical bulletin or whatever. And when he wrote let's sell him a piece of blue sky, Scientology tried to suppress the book, and they went all the way to the Supreme Court and failed, and the book got published. So it really is the most important book I think people need to read if they are ex-Scientologists.
Okay, good. Well, I'm gonna beat the drum in any way I can to help make that audiobook happen.
Great.
And I did a chat with John that people should be able to see on his channel this Saturday. Just John Atak, John or Jon?
Jon Atack.
Yeah.
He's got a YouTube channel, John Atak, I believe, and Friends or Family and Friends. Maybe you can put up the interview on your channel. And
absolutely. I think he emailed me today and said that I could. So I will.
Yeah, so that way people can have a direct experience about him. And when people ask me, is there anyone in the world that could talk my Scientologist son, daughter, husband, wife, or whatever, I'm like, go to Nottingham and spend a day with John.
One of these days I'll have to do that.
Please do. I'm telling you. And he's so mild-mannered and so respectful, but he's so knowledgeable that you just like, holy mackerel. He really has a breadth and depth of information and knowledge. It's pretty exceptional.
So here's one of the last questions I want to ask you. So I talk about your book, Combating Cult Mind Control, really because it's the only book that I've read of yours, and I couldn't even imagine there was more. But you've written many books. You're prolific. You have a lot of material. You have lectures. You have courses. When you're helping people who are leaving a cult, what of your materials do you find most effective in that effort?
Well, some people are in cults where they never read anything and it's hard for them to sit and concentrate. That was me when I first got out of the Moonies, even though I was an English major 2.5 years earlier and would read 2 to 3 books a week as my part of my life. I just love to learn and I love to read. But there's audiobooks. So anyway, if you don't like to read or it's hard for you to concentrate, it's on audio is Combating and Freedom of Mind. Freedom of Mind is more my ideas about how to empower people to start reality testing. So it's about how to talk to people in mind control cults and how to build connection with them, get them to look at things from different perspectives, etc. Those are the 2 that I recommend. And come to Freedom of Mind and go to the blogs and just skim and see if anything stands out that will pique your interest, because people will always, benefit if there's something that they're directly interested in. So hearing about a Department of Labor expert talk about labor trafficking, that might be of interest. I did an interview with a Harvard psychiatrist called Rewired, and it's all the scientific research on how the digital world is rewiring our brains. That was really, really fascinating and interesting. I just did an interview with Michael Shermer of Skeptic magazine.
Oh, yeah.
And he has a book out on conspiracies and how to approach that whole thing. So, but the bottom line is there's lots of great material out there, and just trust yourself and proceed. I'm a big fan of the course I just put up. It's a 9 hours. It's a little over 9 hours. I call it a foundational course for clinicians because I aimed it to mental health professionals. I got CE credits, continuing ed credits, but it's really good for anybody if you want a deeper dive and understanding what is a dissociative disorder. How do you do therapy with them? How do most mental health professionals get it wrong? And so it's a foundational course, basically.
Interesting. You did mention that the value of seeking out former members, and you mentioned kind of like seeing that it is possible to succeed and be happy outside of whatever high control group that you're in. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's one of sort of the reasons why I have decided to dedicate the time to putting up content each day. Is I had an experience myself in 1998, 1999, where I could have left Scientology if the information I was being exposed to showed me what you just said. Oh, there are former members. It is possible to be happy and vibrant and thrive outside. I was exposed to information that, to me, instead of showing me that, reinforced the programming that I was already getting in Scientology, that these people who are criticizing Scientology, they're all liars, they're all SPs, they exaggerate, they're just out to destroy Scientology.
Right.
And I wanted to do my own small part to create a body of information or whatever, where people who stumble onto the internet, they're starting to stumble out of Scientology, they stumble onto the internet, they can see somebody talking about this subject very fairly, upbeat, I
Funny.
never say anything. I try to be funny. I never say anything false about Scientology. I never exaggerate about Scientology. I want them to be able to, and also, I am successful, even though you don't see that on my channel per se. You just see me. But it's always been my hope that I wanted people to see, oh, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. He's fair. He's very accurate.
He's smart.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to.
No, I mean, you need to hear it, and your listeners should hear that. Whoops, you're getting red. Watch out. You're blushing.
But I'll tell you, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I'm also have had the privilege through the work that I do at the Aftermath Foundation to be able to hear from people who are leaving and who we are helping to escape, that the videos, and specifically being able to see someone talk about stuff that they know is true, talk about it in a way that they know is accurate, allowed them to start for the first time, have information pierce the thought-stopping veil. You mentioned that in Scientology, it's particularly strong in Scientology. The thought-stopping, the completely shutting down as soon as you hear a criticism of L. Ron Hubbard or the tech or David Miscavige or anything like that.
Right.
And so what was my point there? Oh yeah, that's one of the purposes of my channel is just to be that guy.
Exactly. And you know why cult leaders program followers to hate former members and call them names is because we are the phobia cure. We're like pulling back the door and saying, hey, it's good out here, you know? Hey, I got married, I had a kid, I have a house, I go scuba diving, I travel the world, I go to concerts and beaches and to see someone who's happy. And in my world, I'm still spiritually minded. I haven't given up on values and spiritual practices. I'm trying to live a well-rounded life. But the other thing that's so helpful from my point of view is and I say this in Freedom of Mind book and my other book, Releasing the Bonds, the least effective way of helping someone is to criticize the leader, the doctrine, or the group. But sharing your story about a different group and asking someone's opinion, like, what do you think about the Moonies? And that's why so many Scientologists read the book about the Mooney, ex-Mooney, right? And my first publisher in '88 wouldn't let me put Hannah Whitfield's story in chapter 5. It was the one censorship, because we got letters from every major cult and said, if you mention us, we're suing you. And we literally, every other cult that I mentioned in that book, we literally wrote a lawyer's letter. Hey, we vetted this book 3 times. We would love for you to sue us because we want the publicity. We would shed a bigger light on you. When can we expect, you know, and nobody did it, right? But my publisher, so I'm setting up for, I bought the rights back 27 years later in 2014 because it was really out of date. It was way before the internet, etc. And I said to my friend John, would you edit the new edition and put everything in about Scientology you think people need to know? So I told his story, but the footnotes are unbelievable in combating because I wanted to include them.
So your original publisher was willing to play chicken with all of those other cults, but not Scientology.
Correct.
Wow.
Remember, it was 1988.
Wow. You know, you talk about, getting a story from another group. When I was watching The Vow, and I'm still not through season 1 yet, and I understand season 2 is pretty incredible as well. What occurred to me is, first of all, Scientologists are allowed to watch The Vow. And second of all, no Scientologist is going to be able to watch The Vow without going, oh my God, this might as well be about Scientology.
Well, Raniere studied Scientology methods. The whole thing about being ethical was ripoff from Scientology, by the way.
I've got to find out where and what he studied. I started to suspect, because I know that Sarah Edmondson has told Mike Rinder that he did study Scientology, but I haven't heard where or what. And part of me wondered if maybe some of the Scientology info had gotten into NXIVM by way of Est or Landmark, because there's a ton of similarities there as well. So
possible.
If I ever get a chance
don't have an answer, but you've piqued my curiosity to see if anyone that I know for sure that he studied neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, and Saltzman also, and they were using conversational hypnotic techniques. People would meet with Raniere for 3 hours and come out and have total amnesia to what they talked about or what happened there.
Incredible. Well, look, we've been going for almost exactly an hour here. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Everyone, please go to freedomofmind.com. And from there, you can see all of Dr. Steve Hassan's socials, YouTube, Twitter. Do you want me to just put that in here? Do you want to say it real quick what they are?
No, sure. So I'm at Cult Expert on Twitter, and now I'm on Mastodon in case I get kicked off of Twitter, but also Instagram. I'm at Cult Expert. I think TikTok also, on LinkedIn. We're just trying to get the message out, and honestly, everybody needs to share their story if they're in a space where they're willing to, because we want to destigmatize, we want to lower the temperature, make it okay for people to walk out of all these other groups that they're afraid to walk out of because they don't want to be embarrassed, they don't want to be shamed by coworkers or whatever. So I'm going to plug igotout.org, and myself and other colleagues, including Sarah Edmondson, are recommending use hashtag #IGotOut when we're messaging, especially if it's a personal story, because we want to model, hey, intelligent, educated, nice people can get hacked. Our minds can get hacked, and there's life after hack. We can go, no, it's my life. It's my body. I want to be healthy. I want to be happy. I'm not happy there. And for people like Mike Rinder, who has family still in, it hurts my heart to think about how many people, how many families have been ripped apart by this awful cult. Yeah. Terrible.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Let's do it again soon.
And you're coming on my Influence Continuum podcast, buddy.
Next week, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.